Good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to be with you here. And I want to express my thanks for the invitation to be with you all here with this esteemed gathering of individuals. I'd like to introduce myself a little more informally. I'm a lawyer and a law professor from the United States, and thus I'm from a world that professes a deep belief in the power of dialogue. In fact, the United States' foundational commitment to free speech is based on the notion that the exchange of ideas facilitated by free speech is what builds and maintains just societies. Yet observing United States free speech in action raises some serious concerns about its potential for healing when underlying power dynamics are not addressed. Perhaps I should wait a few minutes to let the audience settle down. Thank you. Free speech dialogue without a consideration of imbalanced power dynamics across groups and people is a license to talk without endangering the status quo. And if nothing changes, then nothing changes. That is not a path to healing. Let me provide more detail about the cautionary tale from the United States, where neo-Nazis, Ku Klux Klan members, and others are legally permitted to spout their hatred against socially disfavored groups because of the US belief that the best answer to hate speech is simply more speech. And in this way, my comments will dovetail with those of President from Slovenia. This equivalency is characterized by the image of a free marketplace of ideas and the belief that the best ideas for society will win out in the marketplace, free of any regulation. What is missing in the free marketplace of ideas image is the recognition that not all of us have the same power to speak and amplify our ideas. Let me give you a concrete example from the current situation in the United States. Between 2017 and 2019 alone, over $12.75 million has been disseminated to US organizations for the purpose of censoring public discussion of racism. These institutions have organized their censorship campaign as an attack on something called critical race theory, with no concern for what the academic school of thought known as critical race theory is actually about. It is instead a shorthand rhetorical label to target the voices of the socially marginalized who are attempting to dialogue about the need to heal the harms of our racial past. For instance, before leaving the presidency, Donald Trump ordered federal agencies in the United States to, quote, begin to identify all contracts or other agency spending related to any training on critical race theory, which he described as un-American propaganda. That directive has since been overturned by US President Biden, but the Congress has brought it back up for consideration. State politicians have picked up this Trump mantle and have passed laws banning public schools from teaching anything regarding racism, with the perverse inversion of casting those who are against racism, anti-racist activists, as the racists whose own freedom of speech should be obliterated. Today, anti-racism disinformation proponents in a growing number of states that include Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Iowa, Montana, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Texas have enacted racial and gender equity prohibitions that disallow our teachers from exposing students to our nation's full history of struggle to be a true egalitarian republic, along with prohibiting cultural awareness sessions in public sector workplaces and for government grant recipients and government contractors. And more copycat bills are being introduced across the country as we speak, under the trumped-up banner of demonizing critical race theory like a boogeyman we should eviscerate. What is important to note is that this well-funded conservative campaign to, as they have said, wage relentless legal warfare against race theory in America's institutions has been based on a mischaracterization of critical race theory. What is it then? Critical race theory offers a way of seeing the world that helps people recognize the effects of historical racism. The intellectual movement behind the idea was started by legal scholars as a way to examine how laws and systems uphold and perpetuate inequality for traditionally marginalized groups. Contrary to the traditional notion that racial subordination represents a deviation from the liberal legal ideal, this body of work recasts the role of law as historically central to and complicit in upholding racial hierarchy, as well as other hierarchies of gender, class, and the like. Critical race theory then dares to look beyond the popular belief that getting rid of racism means simply getting rid of ignorance or encouraging everyone to get along through dialogue alone. It is comprised of a collection of diverse activists and scholars interested in revealing and transforming the relationship among race, racism, and power. Thus, contrary to the conservative mischaracterization, this theory is not a campaign to cancel free speech. It is a pursuit of meaningful racial equality. The conservative anger against critical race theory can be located in how it draws upon the voices of socially excluded racial group members to provide insights about how to use the law as an affirmative tool to ameliorate inequality, while simultaneously assessing its limits, embedded racial biases within the legal system itself. In short, the opposition to critical race theory is rooted in the resistance to full social inclusion and equity that can change the status quo of centuries of racial hierarchy. Censoring the language of anti-racism is an effort to limit what we are allowed to officially see and tell. And so what we have today in the United States is a symbolic commitment to dialogue as an engine of justice, while on the ground, there is a growing movement to stamp out the voices and perspectives necessary for meaningful dialogue. Talking without ensuring inclusion and amplification of the formerly excluded is dialogue as pure theater. Yet words do have power. When hate speech is permitted to be propagated, it encourages a social climate in which particular groups are denigrated and their discriminatory treatment is accepted as normal. That's just how it is. That's just how they are. Racism is often based on, legitimated by, or acquired by discourse, talking. It is through this discourse that dominant group members learn the dominant ideologies of their group, as well as the norms, values, and attitudes that organize the daily social practices of everyday discrimination and exclusion. Daily discrimination has a logic, and these reasons are learned, reproduced, and legitimated within dominant groups. Prevalent social representations about marginalized groups thus not only explain the reasons of unequal treatment, but also why they are showing up in many elite discourses of dominant groups. The loss of life from priming individuals to hate through a verbal campaign of derogatory messaging was tragically evident not only with the Nazi Holocaust, whereby the murder of 6 million was preceded by virulent hate speech propaganda, but again with the 1994 Rwanda genocide of Tutsi and the 1995 Bosnian genocide of Muslim and Croatians. Again, I state, words matter. So let me conclude by urging that we all consider how to facilitate the dialogue we desire for societal healing, that we remain alert to the need to be intentional, not only about inclusion, but with addressing power dynamics that diminish the ability for every voice to be heard and truly accorded value for making change. Thank you.